Good morning, guys, and happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And even just saying that, it's like, wow, I'm so excited to be growing. I'm excited to be growing. I'm excited to have done something, created something, and stuck with it, And I think that there's really something in that. I was talking to my sister who is in the fashion field doing her thing, and now she's styling, and like things are just great for her, and I'm so happy for her. But I remember when she first started, and it was like years ago, and I remember the grittiness of it all, the messiness, her having all of these clothes in her apartment, and like, being there to model with her in the fights we would get into because we were sisters, and like she was bossing me around and for her business and things like that. And something that just really inspires me. And I guess, to kind of start the podcast off, I just kind of wanted to come on here and share this with you all, is that, really stick to what it is that you're doing. Whenever you do something, just stick with it. I remember when I first started writing, it started off as a blog. It was the creatives.site. I don't think there's anyone here who may have remembered that era, and who followed me through that phase. I had a WordPress blog. It was super cute. I designed it myself. I was so proud to be able to get on there and, put in my little poems or whatever the case may be. And then I think I might have grew discouraged, right? I wasn't able to monetize on the blog. I didn't quite know how to monetize on the blog. I was like checking out other people's, YouTube videos and things like that. But I can't admit it was nothing extensive. I wasn't willing to like pay for a course or anything like that. But, I just remember, being in that space, and I felt discouraged. And so I was like, well, I'm finishing up the blog. I'm done with this, because I was marketing on Tumblr at the time. And I was like, I'm going to publish a poetry book. And so I wrote my first book, Seasons. That was pretty much me like wrapping up everything for the creatives site. And in hindsight, I was very proud of that project, because I felt like I wasn't necessarily giving up. I was just kind of like wrapping up a present and being like, hey, I'm done with this. But when it was time to really market my book and really go all out, I kind of gave up on promotion. I didn't have the confidence at the time to really go out and talk to people about my book. My poems, I felt at the time, and even still really, were so intimate and so deeply personal. Some of them were about my family, some of the things I struggled with growing up. Like, it was hard, and so I just didn't know how to package that at the time. I didn't want to be someone who was like, this is what happened to me, and et cetera, because I think that, when you're selling something, you kind of have to stick to the storyline, right? And I was thinking about this today too, in terms of, me writing a book and, relating to people about some of the things I've gone through. And I guess you could say traumas, big T and little T traumas, right? And I was thinking about like, how do you guys make friends, right? So my premise for today's video, I'm just going to be talking a little bit about Sabrina String's book, which I actually haven't even got into the book. I did something for the first time. I never used to read the prologues or introductions, but I actually read it. I read hers, yeah, I think that's how she identifies. Yeah, I read hers, and I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about that. But so anyway, to me, I felt like I understand that there are some things that we go through in life that can absolutely inspire somebody else, right? I believe that. I truly believe that. I truly believe that we go through things in life. We have testimonies we can share with other people. But I do think that there is an element in there to where, it gets to a point where it's like where the sharing becomes a bit of like trauma dumping. And one thing that I'm kind of noticing about some people, and I think for me, even when I was promoting my book, I didn't care to stay in that space. Were there other poems in the piece that brought about a sense of lightness? Sure. Sure. But I didn't quite know how to package that. And so when I think about people today, and I think about relationships all the different, I've met a lot of people who feel as though when I first meet them, they need to tell me all the bad things that have happened to them. They experienced SA, and this is going on with this, and this is going on with that. And this is not a matter of being insensitive, but I do think we've got to a point where we have normalized trauma talk and trauma therapy and like this language to where we feel as though this is appropriate, and we do it all in the name of just being real. And we want to bring our hurts to other people in the name of like, I'm just being vulnerable, when the reality is that like, you just don't have any boundaries. You don't have any boundaries for the way you live your life. And we get upset with other people who have boundaries. We think they're mean. We think they're trying to be funny. We think they're rude. We think they don't like us, when the reality is that like, you're just a bit of a hot mess right now, and I just think that, so as I was reading Shervina String's introduction, one, I want to just say this, right? She identifies as queer. And I think something that I would definitely say for a lot of people, because she's obviously writing about Black women in love and relationships and so forth. Just because you're queer doesn't mean you're objective, right? Like just because you don't date and you're not engaging in heterosexual, normative, relationships and behaviors and, presentation, et cetera, does not mean that you are objective and that you can essentially be the spokesperson for relationships, right? Like she shares an example of how she's dating this white guy and she, he's like, she meets his friends are racist. She makes, commentary or not commentary rather, but she, kind of talks about how they were looking at her hair and things like that. And then she goes on to say like, they had sex, which is something that she ultimately offered him. And she had a meeting on her campus where she was going to be advocating for black issues. It was like the sororities were doing blackface. So she was a part of like the community organizer, whatever. And so she wanted to kind of, speak about this, and she was upset that he didn't. And so they broke up. And so she said, this is what it is. It's the fetishization of Black women. And I'm like, whoa. One, he's white, right? This is one thing that I talked about. I literally wrote about this and I said, when regret starts to surface from interracial dating, right? I wrote about this back in like 2022, y'all, 2023, 2020. No, it was definitely like 2022 on my blog, on my column on Medium. And I spoke to you guys about how regret resurfaces after your choice to interracially marry. Too many scholars, too many African-American scholars choose to get partners who are of another race and then get upset when they do not back you and Black people in Black allegiance, right? Like, why are you like, this is not a matter of like, he just was fetishizing over her. This was a matter of like, you are dating a white man and you're expecting him to do what exactly? Like, I just think we have these unrealistic expectations when we choose to cross that racial divide, like, yeah, you might be progressive and you're growing in those ways, but guess what? That's the reality. Yeah, their family, they're still racist. They still have they're still going to see you as a spectacle. And so I just think that so much of it, as much as we try to glorify it online and there's all this like glamoring, this glamorization of like interracial dating, you're always going to be stuck with that elephant in the room. You know what I mean? You're Black and they're white and this is America. Okay. There's history. There's ongoing discrimination, right? They're literally trying to get rid of the VRA. Like, what are we doing? But she tried to twist it and say that this was a thing about Black women and blah, 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 when it really wasn't, though. They just were never compatible in the first place. And then she said, they went on a couple dates and it worked out and she decided to just, offer up the sex and they were having sex. And obviously you could say, well, Jalen, that's a pretty conservative thing to say. And y'all know I don't have any one specific political, affiliation. That's not where I'm at. But I just more so just say that to say that like, sometimes it's not always a Black woman's issue or a Black man's issue. One of the things that I'm learning about people as you get older and you have more experiences is like, there are a lot of broken people. And life has a way of doing that to you, and I think that stability of mind, of resources, all of these things are incredibly rare. I think a lot of people, if I'm being honest, one of the things I've personally seen is that people who grow distressingly bitter, they don't actually want to work for the things that they want, but they just want to just be angry about not attaining those things, and this is not about poverty. This is just more so about, for example, you have men who are like, I want this type of economic lifestyle, but they're not willing to really work for it and try to find a path that is legitimate. And I'm not talking about criminality. I'm talking about something that is solid. Like, hey, I'm going to go to school to be an engineer. I'm going to stack this bread. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to build the business, right? Like, everybody within American society, for the most part, wants to take a gamble on the lottery, right? The lottery of entrepreneurship, which is nothing wrong with that. I appreciate the ingenuity. But at the end of the day, we need practicality and we need plans, and we also need money and resources to fund the businesses, right? And so you have a bunch of people today who are distressingly and incredibly bitter because of that. And then you also take into consideration just being in a fallen world, coming into, being young persons and dealing with, trauma and abuse and things like that. And you have people who don't get therapy, or if they do go to therapists, right? I know a lot of mental health advocates and those who are in this space can speak to the reality that most of the therapists and counselors who are in the spaces to kind of counsel people who have struggled, right, and who may be low income or whatever the case may be, unfortunately are not always adequate, right? They're not always competent enough to kind of delve into some of those more complexities. And so, yeah, you have a bunch of broken people. And the thing about it is, like, when you start talking about relationships, it's really hard being in these type of dynamics because they're going to pull you down, right? And when I say pull you down, it's not about being malicious. It's not about being cruel. It's not about them hating on you. It's just the simple fact that if someone is like really wallowing in a pit, right, and they're in distress and they're spiraling and they're in this torment, this inner torment from the things that have happened to them, they're not present. All they want is for someone to come and sit with them in the past, right? They want you to come and sit with them about what happened, why it happened, and they can only meet you there, right? And so they're going to bring you down because here you are and you're like, hey, let's go for a jog, or what do you like to do? And it's like, well, and it's like you're constantly dealing with that type of like sulking behavior. But today we've normalized it, right? We've normalized it in the name of being emotionally intelligent, in the name of being self-aware, in the name of being empathetic, in the name of being, emotionally intelligent. And so what you have today is you meet a lot of people who are in that space. And something I was thinking about the other day too is like, man, I think so many, you talk about relationships and things like that. I'm not going to say so many, but I think many people struggle because people don't really know how to be adults, right? Like, I don't think that there's a course on it. And I know we kind of just like brush over it with such casualty, but like, I just don't think that many people honestly know how to be about their business, right? And I'm not just saying like, in the literal sense, like be about their business. Cause I feel like, one thing about it, we're going to get a bag, right? Like making money is the easy part. But I think just in terms of being somebody who has self-control, being somebody who is responsible, being somebody who knows how to use what it is that you have to get to, what I mean? Being somebody who's resourceful. Like, I just think there is a level of self-sufficiency that is just completely out the window. It's completely out the window. And so I think we show up in the lives of friends and relationships and we're looking for someone to validate them, right? For example, with Sabrina Strings, she gives this example of, dating this white man and, the relationship being what it was. And she wants to try to say, well, this is the hypersexualization of Black women. And it's like, no, right? If you are a African-American scholar and you are the city council, you are the, the council member, right? The community organizer of some type of program at your college, right? Your university where you're advocating on behalf of African Americans, why would you go then and date a white American? You know what I mean? Like, what is it that you're looking for in that dynamic? Because I just think with a bunch of African American scholars or people who even just have a little bit of understanding about Black history, it's like, why would you then go and choose this particular partner and then try to say, well, it's the men, because that's the thing about shame and pain, right? When things take place, especially in the lives of many African Americans, there's nowhere for the pain to go, right? And so if it comes out, it's anger, right? Because it's anger because you can't be hurt, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, she's queer identifying. So again, doesn't necessarily mean she's objective, but it's like, if you were really hurt about this white guy choosing to break things off with you or not supporting you and what it is that you're doing, you can't say that you're hurt, right? So now you have to kind of rationalize it, because that's just what it is to be a black American, right? A lot of times you don't really get to express the sadness. You have to, it kind of either gets turned into anger, or you have to try to find a way to understand it, or, that's why we like, civil rights, we were like forgiving and things like that. Like, we don't really get the opportunity to be like angry. And so when you start talking about relational dynamics, if the person that you're dating is not being accountable, or the friend that you're dating is not being accountable, that pain, that shame, that grief has nowhere to go but to return to you, right? And so I think that's when we start to kind of internalize a lot of that stuff. But yeah, overall, you guys, I just wanted to come on really quick. I know this podcast is like, I don't know, but I just wanted to kind of just maybe shed a little light on this dynamic, because I just think you meet a lot of people today who don't really know how to show up, period. With Sabrina, maybe she felt like, if she felt sexy enough, to have sex with this white man, that was going to guarantee. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what her thought process was at the time, and again, this is not about being conservative or, policing women's bodies. I don't really, hey, you do what you want to do. You're a grown person, but I'm just more so saying that I just think that there's an element to relationships to where, like I said, on the one end, there's things that happen to us and we don't have a space for the pain to go, so we internalize it. But I think there's an other, side to this, to where I just think the way that we show up is never questioned, right? We don't ever question, how are we showing up? You know what I mean? How are we showing up? Because, it's not always a matter of like, people aren't into you or whatever, but it's like, if you're showing up to friend groups and you're just like oversharing, trauma dumping, that's too much. Like, there's a podcast, I'm going to go, but there is a podcast by Sheena Tubbs, and she talks about like the 4 layers of intimacy or something. You can probably Google it. And the first one is like superficial things like the weather, yeah, we'll just leave it there. That's the only example I got. And then the second layer is like, oh, well, what's your favorite show? Or what's your favorite X, Y, and Z? And then like the third thing is like, well, this is what you dream of doing. Like, I want to start a business. I want to start a TikTok, right? And then the fourth layer of intimacy is like, this is what happened to me. This is how I've grown. Okay, let me emphasize that. This is how I've grown, right? We don't just stay there, and this is my life and this is my family. And when you think about it, nobody is really taught how to do this in relationships. So we show up, we're all over the place, we're chaotic, and then we're wondering why relationships aren't working out. And like, again, I'm not here to say certain dynamics with black men and black women don't matter. I'm not here to say any of that. But what I am here to say is that I know for a fact that a lot of people just aren't taught how to show up and how to exist, especially, without all the shame and all the drama. We love to say things like, well, you're just too this, right? Like when we coach one another in terms of how to show up in relationships and how to have healthy relationships, there's always an element of shame. And I do think that comes from slavery, because there's really no reason why we are so crass with our words. Especially when we're trying to teach other African Americans. As you guys know, we were deprived of education. And I do think from a historical context, there's always kind of been an element of those who are educated feeling the need to talk down on those who are not educated, So I don't think that we always need to degrade one another when we come out to share insight. But I just wanted to come on really quick to just kind of shine a little bit of a light on this, because I think we hear so much of the men versus women conversation. And like Sabrina String's book is going to delve into black men and black women's dynamics, and just how essentially black women are, not seen as desirable, which many of that is true in the sense that it's stereotypical and propaganda. But I also think there's an element of that to where, we just have to kind of sit with some of the dynamics and some of the ways in which we show up. I think the other thing I'll end by saying, we start talking about complexities with friends and things like that. People always want to be in rooms with people that they are not in alignment with, right? And I'm talking about the latter, right? It's not a matter of shutting the door. It's not a matter of being a gatekeeper. It's not a matter of a lack of upper mobility. It's just a matter of alignment. It's a matter of compatibility. And I think everybody is always wanting that thing that's so far-fetched, that's so far out there, instead of being like, hey, listen, I'm on the ground. Let me take a real hard look at myself and get real about some things. You know what I mean? And I just don't think that we do that. And so I do think in part that is probably the reason why you have people who come online and coach people in relationships. And I'm not just talking romantic, but friendships as well, work relationships as well. And there's always this element of like, being degrading. And I think in part it's because, unfortunately, you try to talk to people and you just try to get them to be grounded, and you're dealing with a lot of like stiff-necked people, and so you have to kind of like I'm not going to say humble them, but I just think in general sometimes people can be a little too far on the superficialities, but even still that brings a lot of nuance and complexity, so I don't want to end there. But I hope that this podcast was a little bit insightful for you, and I just hope that you're able to kind of not necessarily turn inward to fix yourself to be better for anybody, but just be honest about some of the dynamics you've seen. When you have people who come into your life and your first reason is like, I don't know. I don't know about this person, right? Like, ask the questions and really kind of start to think about those 4 layers of intimacy and start to ask yourself, have you ever, allowed things to progress in that way? Oftentimes you're meeting people and the first date, they only to level 4 and it's like, that's just too much. It's not about being avoidant. It's just a matter of like self-control, self-respect, and having a little bit of more self-governance with yourself. I think people who can't like be a little bit more self-governed, I think it's a turnoff, me personally, because it's just like, let's just, boundaries. What's going on? You're all over the place. You're spilling all over the place. It's too much. It's too much. You're just trying to enjoy your wine, eat your potatoes, kiki. Let's have a little laugh, but I don't know. I guess for some people, dating is such a serious thing, and just like with Sabrina Strings and her disappointment, like maybe it's I'm not going to say more serious, but I do think for some people, maybe depending on what they're looking for, I don't know. I just think that some people can be very off in the deep end, but I don't know. You guys let me know. How do you date? Do you go from level 4 and work your way back, or what do you do? Peace.